Thank you. And thank you, Jonathan, for having me. I appreciate it. So I'll just go ahead and jump right in. Let's see if this, all right, here we go. So most people are familiar with the name Silicon Valley, but not as familiar with how it came into being. This is where some of the world's biggest companies are based, names like Apple, Google, and Meta, which are inextricably associated with the towns of Cupertino, Mountain View, and Menlo Park, respectively. So I would guess that most of you in this room would recognize one of these towns' names, even if you've never been there before. And over the years, many other cities have co-opted this branding in an attempt to recreate this success. But the problem is that Silicon Valley really has more in common with Main Street communities than it does with major metropolitan areas. And actually, there's another one that I didn't put on the map, but I lived in Kansas City at one point. In the middle of in the country there, they refer to it as Silicon Prairie, and that kind of includes Kansas City, Omaha, Nebraska, and I think Oklahoma City. So, which of these downtown main streets is home to the world's largest technology companies? Can you tell? Does anyone here have a guess which one is home to the world's largest technology companies? It's kind of hard, right? Well, no, you can't, because you know. So, of course, and that's the point, right? So the one on the right is downtown Westminster, where I'm from, and the rest of my staff from Magic, and a couple other guys here that I recognize. And the one on the left is Mountain View, where Google is headquartered. So not only do they look similar, but prior to the computer age, both of these cities were small train station towns in the shadows of nearby major metropolitan areas. Uh-oh. There we go. And both originally offered low cost of living, high quality of life, with nearby colleges, and eventually attracted defense contractors. So why then were the towns in Silicon Valley so prosperous when other Main Street communities have faced so much economic hardship over the years? In many ways, the difference is connectivity. For example, both Westminster and Mountain View boomed in the 1800s thanks to the railroad. But Westminster cut off its passenger rail service in the 1960s and then blocked major highway expansion of a highway called 795 throughout the 80s. And because I was presenting here today, I wanted to take a brief glance at Cumberland's history, and I found very quickly that there's even starker contrast in terms of this disruption of connectivity, where transportation is affecting economic development, which in Cumberland was largely dependent on manufacturing and distribution. But the less obvious difference is economic development, at least to the general public and others. So traditional economic development throughout the U.S. really focuses on turning land into office capacity, to lure large employers into spec buildings, right? All the while emphasizing a large, low-paying, large low-wage workforce. But in Silicon Valley, what we see is what I would call technology-driven economic development, which emphasizes infrastructure for the high-tech needs, investing in small startup businesses with high growth potential, and the workforce of fewer but higher-paying jobs. Both models are then perpetuated by workforce development accordingly. And now, these don't need to be mutually exclusive. But research conducted by the Kauffman Foundation, based in Kansas City, shows that if you only invest in attracting large employers, then these wins will cancel out eventually, with big layoffs over time, as I'm sure many of you have heard in news reports over the decades of big layoffs. Whereas investing in smaller startup companies leads to sustainable long-term job growth. And just another quick note on this. Startups do tend to have more churn, but as long as there's a continued sort of supply of startups, that's how you get that net new job growth over time. So, okay, let's look at Silicon Valley a little bit more closely. And I apologize for the diagram here. It might be a little hard to read. But this phenomenon is observed in the very DNA of Silicon Valley. So starting in 1955, a single employer called Fairchild Semiconductor which actually spun out of Shockley's semiconducting business, spawned hundreds of other startup companies, many whose names you won't recognize, but then a few you will. So there's, Intel is in that lineage of startup companies that came out of Fairchild Semiconductor. Their combined value, the companies represented here, is in the trillions. So that gives you a sense of just how powerful economically these startups all were in creating Silicon Valley. And which, of course, is greater than the gross domestic product of most countries. They also share in common academic interdependency with Stanford University. So Stanford strategically positioned itself to develop the workforce needed for the semiconductor industry, not only creating a steady flow of workforce, but also aligning university research and development with the needs of the industry, which continues to this day. Which is surprising because prior to the 1950s, Stanford was considered a second-rate, maybe even third-rate school for engineering, way behind Harvard and other more established and Ivy League universities. So how did Stanford kind of leapfrog all these other guys? Well, that all changed because of this man, Fred Terman. So he had the connections to the defense contracts coming out of World War II and had a connection with Stanford University. And his coordination of the industry research needed with the end goal of that research to be commercialized or put into actual manufacturing was unusual for academia at that time. And so this was a unique proposal of getting Stanford really in lockstep with the needs of of defense at that time, not just academic research for the sake of academic research. So this is considered the very first engine of entrepreneurship that created the semiconductor industry, in Silicon Valley, and drove the academic interdependency with Stanford. This was also the earliest version of what most research universities would now refer to as technology transfer. So here is a quick example, again, pretty detailed chart, might be hard to read where you are, but it shows the cycle of technology transfer with the goal of academic research leading to commercialization and making its way through licensing out into industry. This is the example from MIT's Technology Licensing Office. So as I started to then look at this engine and how this perpetuated itself in Silicon Valley, in my own community, I spoke with Chris Abel. Oh, Chris, are you here? I don't see him. Chris Abel from the Carroll Technology Innovation Council. And we put our heads together to kind of get a list of all the different technology companies in Carroll County to kind of see, who has this kind of phenomenon taking place, or maybe who's part of something that resembles what we observed in Silicon Valley. And while any of these companies really could have that engine going, for example, I know, actually I don't even think Vapco is on here, but a Vapco in Tawnytown, I went to their offices recently and it was just lined with all the patents that they had. That kind of innovation, is going to throw off additional innovation and other businesses and ideas eventually. But there are a couple in particular in this list that I notice a very small indication of a trend happening. And that's with the autonomous robotics industry in Carroll County. So many of you might not know this, but Westminster was actually the first city in Maryland to be testing fully autonomous vehicles back in like 2005 or so. And other than maybe in Pittsburgh with Carnegie Mellon, one of the first and probably in the entire Mid-Atlantic region. So to kind of back up and explain how that happened. So in 1991, F&M Manufacturing in Hampstead, Maryland began building robotics. And they were quickly acquired by General Dynamics Robotic Systems. When that closed, employees mostly stayed in Carroll to work for other companies with robotics needs, including robotic research in nearby Montgomery County, AAI and Textron in Baltimore County, and Knorr Brake Company. Yes, it's not a silent K, it's Knorr. It took me a while to figure that out. And they are a train parts manufacturer. And don't be deceived by the name Knorr Brake. They don't just manufacture brakes. They actually do a lot of autonomous systems for trains, including fully autonomous trains, which is why some of the people at General Dynamics went to then go work for Knorr Brake. But then some of the startups started to form. So we have Dynamic Dimension Technologies spun out of GDRS. We had Land Sea Air Autonomy spin out. They both stayed in Westminster. And then employees who went to robotic research then also started RRAI in Montgomery County, which is mostly engaged in the autonomous systems for the trucking industry. And then we also started to see some academic interdependency actually forming between Johns Hopkins University, University of Maryland, mostly College Park, but also UMBC. And then now in Westminster, we have McDaniel College, which is a 4-year liberal arts college, not traditionally a research university, but they are now starting to spin up data science programs and computer science programs that are starting to recognize that there are opportunities here for their students for internships and employment. So they're starting to also become more aligned, as is our local community college. So our local community college has a great drone aviation program, great cybersecurity program, all relevant to this industry. So the other thing to make note of, and the keynote this morning from Usko, he was talking about his former company, WinCode, and talking about how the presence of WinCode in Miami, teaching developers how to code, kind of led to the development of their whole their tech ecosystem. So the point I'm trying to make on this slide is that you don't have to be a credentialed academic institution to contribute to this phenomenon. So case in point also, my organization, which is a 501c3 nonprofit in Westminster, does technology education in part, but we also help with entrepreneurship. We help find funding opportunities for local entrepreneurs, and we create opportunities for volunteers and mentors to engage with our local industry and our students. And so all of this helps us sort of output economic development, much in the same way that I would imagine the founder of WinCode might describe how WinCode contributed to the formation of that ecosystem in Miami. And I'm sorry, and thanks to a generous grant from Knorr Brake Company in Westminster, Magic is now building a project-based learning facility to teach autonomous robotics to local students. So this was something that really emerged out of the conversations we started to have with those industry partners, and just by turning over stones and kind of learning that this was a heritage that we had locally, we realized, that expression, the cobbler's children wear no shoes. It's like, well, how can we get the cobbler's children to wear shoes? Well, let's actually invite the industry partners who've been developing these technologies for decades now and have them interact with local students. And so that's what we want this facility to be, the Autonomous Robotics Innovation Center. So Knorr Brake donated a generous grant to Magic to help us get this started. And now we have over how many hundreds of thousands of dollars in in-kind support, Gabby? $400,000 in in-kind support from those local industry partners. So they are all, thank you. And Gabby does a lot of the grant writing for us too. So, so that applause goes for her as well. And anyway, so I don't want to get sidetracked, but none of this really would be, actually real quick, not to get too extemporaneous here, but this is really going to provide the hands-on applied experience in robotics that you don't see really even until you get to maybe grad level programs in universities. And I know that because one of our other industry partners, a company called Kick Robotics in Montgomery County that does autonomous soil testing on farms, and is part of a TEDCO grant that they won that we're a part of, told me, he said, hey, the stuff that you're doing here with these ducky bots and train systems and autonomous go-karts, this is stuff that my grad student interns from College Park have never done. So, again, you don't have to be a major university to bring these types of partners together and to create that synergy. All right, so, but none of this would be possible, going back to the original theme of connectivity, without the city of Westminster's investment in broadband. So we made that choice as a city. I wasn't there at the time, but this was back in 2012 or so. The city invested about $16 million in laying its own municipal gigabit fiber network. So we had a city council that was very forward thinking at the time, a council president who actually had to start his own ISP at one point in Virginia and understood all of these things. He's also one of our founders at Magic, so he knew that even after that investment in fiber, there would need to be some sort of nonprofit that would help to continue promoting the fact that we had fiber there. And so it has done all of these things and more in terms of connecting people. So connectivity in the modern sense now, it's not just about roads, it's about internet. So think about the pandemic and remote working and distance learning. You know, if you didn't have that broadband connection, how would you participate in that? Again, none of this really would be possible without that connectivity. So that's a major part of what we're experiencing now in Westminster. And of course, that all contributes to quality of life, as I mentioned earlier, which is a key component of where people want to live. So this is just the tip of the iceberg because I don't know if anyone was in Todd Marks's discussion, but he talked about digital twins. So because of our fiber infrastructure and unique industry profile, Magic is working with our industry partners to create the Autonomous Corridor Project that will bring more attention and talent to Carroll County and the City of Westminster as a means to showcase the capabilities and industry expertise. And this is largely being done through the development of a digital twin asset of the city. In our case, it's not just the industrial control systems that will have a digital twin, but the physical representation of the city as well. So we've done ground LiDAR scanning of a large chunk of the city. We've worked with our local Civil Air Patrol, which was an amazing organization. If you're not familiar with the Civil Air Patrol, they worked with the US Air Force and the FAA to get us a permit to do drone scans during the day over a populated area, which is very difficult to do within the airspace of an airport. So all of those things were immense challenges, but the Civil Air Patrol made it happen for $50. So that's because they will donate their services. I think they said originally it would have been valued around like $10,000, $20,000 worth of services had it been an independent private company looking for this, but because we were representing the city, they were willing to donate those services and asked for a nominal fee of $50, which I don't even think they've invoiced us for yet. So anyway, so this is going to create the operational design domain for the connected autonomous systems that will be deployed in the City of Westminster. And so that also means we have an asset by which they can all be trained ahead of time, running just thousands of simulations, probably instantly, without ever actually hitting the ground, without the rubber actually hitting the road. So that by the time that does happen, they have all the detail of the city, they know how all the systems work, they know where all the potholes are, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway. So the goals of this, it's not just innovation for innovation's sake. We actually were part of a transportation survey in the city with McDaniel College, who worked with us on that survey, so talking again about interdependency, to find out that there was actually some really difficult transportation gaps for residents in Westminster. Because we have a state route that cuts right through, we don't have highways, we don't have a public transit system, at least not one that's one that you can just show up at a bus stop and wait 15 minutes for it to arrive. It's not like that kind of system. So just getting around inside the city is a big challenge. In one of the earlier slides, when I showed Cumberland, you saw the streetcar. Losing the streetcar system, I imagine, was pretty profound impact for Cumberland back in the 30s. I'm sure they were thinking ahead in terms of roads for cars, but something must have been lost in terms of the reliable public transportation of that streetcar system. So then also we want to future-proof against new technologies, drone freight delivery, obviously autonomous shuttles, public transit, but then eventually flying cars, which are coming pretty quickly, the VTOL aircraft. And then to, of course, create and strengthen that academic interdependency between our industries and our academic institutions. So here are some quick photos of a showcase that Magic promoted about 1.5 years ago. It was right between two peaks of the pandemic, so people were comfortable enough gathering outside at least. And we we invited all the different autonomous robotics companies in our region, but also we had Perrone Robotics from Charlottesville, Virginia, come up. They offered free autonomous shuttle rides. I mean, this technology is here and it's available. It's just slowly rolling out because of regulatory space. But there are certain cities, I know at least in Florida and others, that have these systems up and running. And some of them are closed campuses like schools or senior living communities, but it's just a matter of time before they're widely adopted as public transit in urban areas. So anyway, so we have Kelly Schultz. Todd earlier also mentioned that she's the new CEO of the Maryland Tech Council. When she came out, she was representing the Maryland Economic Development. Those are pictures of people riding the autonomous shuttle. We have some pictures of one of our industry partners, Dynamic Dimension Technologies. Again, that's actually the CEO right there. It's Carl. He used to work at General Dynamics Robotic Systems in Westminster, has been doing this kind of stuff his whole career. He's driving my car, which was wrapped in purple graphics and mounted with a LiDAR camera. And we just drove that around Westminster and started gathering the data. That's what it looks like, the point cloud data, that's what it looks like initially. And then through his software that his company develops, they can take the point cloud data and render it into polygons, and then you get full 3D rendered, texture mapped renderings of the city. Here's the aerial scanning done by the Civil Air Patrol that I mentioned. They got approved for the fixed wing drone there, which was also a big deal. We ended up actually using quadcopters too, multiple quadcopters to go out. And we scanned this sort of area here in red. So that's like we have the ground LiDAR and now the aerial photogrammetry that gets stitched together in the software that our local industry partner has developed. And this is what that looks like. So this is called VX-Sim. This was actually developed for the Navy to train autonomous amphibious vehicles in surf zones. And DDT works actually pretty closely with the University of Iowa, of all places, where they have a big wave basin, like pool simulation thing, where they test the vehicles. But so I asked Carl, speaking of cobbler's children wearing no shoes, I said, Carl, can you do what you do for the surf zone with autonomous amphibious vehicles in Westminster just for public transit? He's like, oh yeah, that's easy. But no one had ever asked him that question, right? No one from the city, no one from economic development. And so that's part of what our responsibility is to create those intentional collision points, if you will. And here's sort of an idea of where we're going next. So we want to deploy fully ADA compliant autonomous shuttles. We want to connect smart adaptive streetlights and various sensors that basically create a smart city environment by which the digital twin asset now comes to life as a fully synthetic version of the city that you can now test anything in. You could build bridges and tunnels if you wanted to, and then delete that and try something else. You can really start to invite a lot more people to that conversation. And as a side tangent, I know through different conversations and meetings I've attended in civil engineering industries that they are having a hard time finding students to take an interest in civil engineering. I think digital twins is going to be one of the ways that you do that through applications like Minecraft. And in fact, I think Helsinki has a fully digital version of Helsinki in Minecraft right now that kids can go in and tear things down, build new things, and play around. That's how you're going to get people interested in civil engineering again. And a quick comment on the ADA compatibility. The reason why that's really important is we've found in surveying the community that most of the people who are really the strongest proponents of this transit are people with special needs or their families who are caring for people with special needs, because they kind of see this as the way in which their family members can attain accessibility and independence on their own. So that if I'm a parent of somebody with special needs and I'm trying to set them up for success in the best possible situation, I'm going to want them to live in a community that has these services for them, where they can reliably use their phone or some sort of device that they can interact with to call that shuttle to their door, have someone help them get in, take them to wherever they need to go, whether it's a job opportunity, whether it's to get food, whatever. So we have, probably half dozen different letters of support from various communities and organizations that specifically care for people with special needs who are helping to promote this project to get it off the ground. Okay, so finally, all this amounts to what we call Silicon Main Street. And that's our vision for Westminster. Certainly it can be extensible to any community. And it's already contributed to increases in tax revenue and population growth. Our U.S. Census in 2010 went from about 18,000 some odd people to 2020 to over 20,000 some odd people. We're one of the few cities that have actually outpaced overall growth in Maryland by percentage points. But yeah, as I was saying, Westminster isn't the only city that can replicate this with the right conditions. Any city can embrace technology and innovation to facilitate interdependence between its industries and colleges. You first need to identify your strengths and weaknesses, and then listen to the marketplace and invest accordingly. Thank you.